So previously we spoke about authentication and lack of proper authentication. You know, things like passwords. Passwords in itself is weak. It's easily guessable. It is something that can be deducted from just talking to a person. We all know about social engineering, things like that. So we all understand passwords are quite weak, and it's something that we should try and avoid. The question now really is, so what else is out there? I know the next generation was one-time passwords or one-time pins, as a matter of fact. So is that really the ultimate, or are there something that is really out there that one can apply to really strengthen your access control, strengthen the access of the people that should be there, but at the same time ensure that you don't strengthen or harden it to such an extent that you cannot really access your own data simply because it's just hardened too much. So what is really out there that one can look at? What is it that you would be looking at?
It's a good question, and this is exactly what organizations are facing today. So they've decided that they want to protect themselves against data breach. A weak credential, typically a password, is the #1 cause of a data breach. So I want to replace it, but what are the choices? There are lots of different options out there. So we tend to use something we call the Authentication Pyramid to try and describe the different types of authentication and the pros and cons between them in levels of security. So the higher you are up the pyramid, the more secure you are. So starting down the bottom, we have the password. It's not really fit for purpose anymore. I think most people really get that now. The primary reason is it's only a single factor of authentication. So I only need that one thing. Once I've got somebody's password, I can be that person. You can guess it, you can steal it. The biggest challenge is reuse these days. So if an organization does what it can to protect its passwords, it can split them up in a database, it can hash them, it can encrypt them, all of these things, it can force strong password policies. If somebody uses that password for another system that doesn't protect them and it gets leaked or stolen, then you get the problem of somebody stealing those passwords, buying them online, not just the passwords, but an army of bots, software packages that can just sit there and play those passwords at systems until you get a hit. So you're not just fighting one person, you're fighting an army that's attacking.
So hold on, so hold on, sorry, what you're saying is that if I use a password for my company access and I use that same password somewhere else and that there's no proper controls around it, my password could have been leaked out, and potentially if somebody's clever enough, they can come into my company and use my password, the same password that I use somewhere else, and actually therefore successfully access my account, being me, basically.
Absolutely. So password reuse is one of the big problems, and it's really hard to stop because we're human beings, and we should never forget the importance of the human being in that security chain. If you try and put something in place that doesn't work with the people who are using it, it just won't work. So passwords, single factor, reused, easily stolen, easily replayed, and quite hard to spot that somebody's doing that. So that's the big problem. You mentioned one-time passwords. There's a couple of ways these are used. So this is a code that's generated, typically lives for about 15 minutes. So it's still a password, but it has a limited lifespan. It can be sent out to a user via a phone. So you can send it out via an SMS message. Banks use this sometimes. Or you could have a dedicated device, Vasco or RSA token. I'm sure we've all carried these around in our time, where you have a little number displayed on the screen. So the way they work is that there's an authentication server that tries to calculate what will that token do at this particular time. Sometimes it's based on an event, sometimes it's a time, but there's a shared secret between the server and the object that's creating that one-time password. And that, while it's significantly more secure than a password, in that it can support 2 factors of authentication. So something I have, such as the device, and some of them support entry of a PIN, something I know as well. So as an attacker, you need both of those factors to be that person. There are still some attack vectors against them. So you can potentially, if you can get access to that central shared secret, you can calculate what that token would do at any time, which is very dangerous. And depending on how you're delivering that one-time password, if it's, for example, going over an SMS message to a phone, SMS is not a secure delivery mechanism. It wasn't designed to be secure. So you can potentially scrape that in transit or from the phone. And if you've got that within that 15 minutes, you can then be that person. So is it more secure? Yes. Is it secure enough? Not really, not in today's world. You then start moving up to what we call cryptography or crypto-based authentication. This is where you have a private key on a device, never leaves the device, held on a secure place on the device, and a public key associated with it. And the way that works is that every time you try to access something, that the application you're trying to access or a server generates a completely random challenge and sends it down to the device. That challenge can't be reused for anything else. It only works that once. What you then do is you digitally sign that challenge with the private key on your device. That typically involves you entering a PIN or putting a finger on a reader if it's a phone, for example. So you have those two factors. You have the device, the thing I have, and either the fingerprint, something I am, or the PIN, something I know. That sends that challenge back to the server. The server can then verify that with a public key. So that private public key is basically like it's almost like a digital signature. So you can verify it, but you can't actually create it. So you can't be that person, but you can verify that that really is that person. And both FIDO and PKI use that private public key cryptography method. The main difference between the two is that FIDO doesn't bind that key to a person. So that works very well in a consumer environment where I may have a FIDO identity for my bank or my network provider or an e-commerce provider, and there is no real relationship between those parties. But in the enterprise, you very much want to know who is accessing my systems. So back to the Experians and the Marriotts, if we knew it was actually the right person accessing the data and not somebody impersonating them, would have been okay. And that's where PKI comes in. So PKI uses that private key and public key, but it also has a certificate that binds that to an individual. So that allows you in an organization to have one credential that you can use to access multiple systems, so you can tie it back to that person. So we think that is, for an organization, certainly the gold standard of security.
Great. So the certificate that you have really is only belongs to you, and it cannot belong to somebody else.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So I suppose maybe a little bit forward, we'll start talking about how do we do credential management, because I suppose it really comes down to that, and I think in a lot of people's minds we have a challenge by saying, but it's quite difficult to manage people coming in, going out, what access they should have, what access to what systems they should have. So I would like to talk about that going forward a little bit later.
Yep.
For me, the real big thing is, so if we've got the two-factor authentication, we've got the certificate, we've got the challenge and response, if I can call it that. Will that be sufficient in a large organization?
So that's a really good question. So when you're talking to chief security officers and IT people around town, they need to, is it enough? Is it secure? Can it do what I need it to do? And there are very few standards around this area in terms of digital identity. So people are often faced with a huge range of choices and vendors telling everybody that their system is the most secure and will do everything they need. But it's hard to validate that. Of the standards that are out there, there's FIPS 201 in the US, which is a government standard set deliberately to identify government employees. Are they who they claim to be? That's very widely used and has also spread out in the US to banks, to aerospace and defense and other organizations who are looking to follow best practice and best standards without reinventing the wheel. And that's PKI based. So the primary digital identity in that system, be it on a card or a phone, is still PKI based. If you look at EIDAS in Europe, so this is around digital signing and access to those records, that's PKI based. And the vast majority of government schemes and access to government systems is based on PKI. Just from personal experience, so our product issues and manages PKI-based identities. That's used to protect US citizen data. It's used to protect access to military helicopter plans. It's used to protect access to systems that track nuclear material, and it's used to access air traffic control towers. So that should give people real confidence that PKI systems work because they've been tried and tested in the field in the most secure areas.
It makes sense, you know, and even on top of that, even if you don't know about all these security and the places where it runs, if you think about it, you know, everybody's moving to digital certificates, electronic signing, electronic documents, and like you said, PKI is really a crypto-based solution. So as we also know, if you apply crypto or cryptology correctly, there's very little chance in it being broken. I know there's a lot of R&D that goes into this. There's a lot of R&D that goes into how can it be broken, and it keeps getting upgraded on an ongoing basis. So if you think that your certificate that you might have or that you're being issued to sign on into a system at the office, as an example, can only probably be broken into in a couple of thousand of years from now. I think that's quite secure in the sense of it's far more secure than my password that I would have guessed or thought out or written down on a piece of paper or used in a different application. I think it just makes sense to say that it's the way we are going right now in terms of certificates that we use, in terms of cryptology that we use in other areas. So why does it not make sense for us to use it for our employees to actually log on to our systems that we've spent millions of rands on to secure it, and just spend that little bit extra by ensuring that our people that we log on, the people that we trust, are really the people that should have access to it. It makes really sense for me.
It does.